r/ask Reddit. Those who have been to a ruined wedding. What happened? A co-worker was at one of best friend's wedding. There were very specific rules about the food. No nuts. There were a couple people there, including the maid of honor who was severely allergic. The venue served something that had nuts. Maid of honor went anaphylactic. EpiPen was not effective, and she died on the way to the hospital. Needless to say, there are lawsuits abound. We attended a wedding for family member who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue but was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and said, "Do you have any friends in city?" We lived an hour away. They had all this food for 100 people but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. This one has seriously bummed me out the most. I'm a wedding photographer. I was at one really fancy one a couple of years ago. Typical outdoor deal at a swanky location in the middle of nowhere. The place was really nice. Had a large concrete stairway flanked by water fountains that led down to the altar area, so the bride could be seen by all like she was ascending from heaven. The ceremony begins and the bridal party come down and take their places. Then the bride appears with her father. She takes 3 or 4 steps down the concrete steps and her shoe twists on her. She tumbled down a good 12 feet or more and busted out the majority of her front teeth in the fall. So much blood all over her, with the place being so isolated. It took a good 40 minutes for ambulance to arrive and she was in intense pain. Ultimately she was okay and I got an email from them weeks later with the rescheduled date. This time there was no stairs anywhere in sight. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids. So they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee etc. But she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress, and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everybody was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honor literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500 plus feet. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid AF. The place was overcrowded. You could barely move without bumping into someone else, and in the heat that was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti and rolls. Not enough to feed even half the guests. Most people left after the first dance. 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. A friend of my girlfriend was getting married. The wedding was quite normal. They got married in the local church and then there was the party in a nice restaurant. The photographer asked the bride and her bridesmaids, my girlfriend was one of them, to go outside for some photos. Some minutes later one of the bridesmaids come back asking for help. There were some swans that attacked the photographer and the majority of the people around him were not doing anything much more than laughing at this guy who was running around and screaming. No luck catching them swans then. Attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone. And much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great. He did 2 copies. One edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is the stuff of legend. A fight broke out between father of the bride, brother of the bride and some guy that just happened to be staying at the hotel. In reality I don't know how much of a fight it was, more just the dad and brother assaulting some man. So anyway, they were both arrested. Cut to the bride sobbing at breakfast because her dad and brother spent the evening of her wedding in jail and now face assault charges for what they did to this poor man. Was a guest of friend of the bride. Did not know anyone attending. Very expensive over the top place. Several hundred guests of this very Italian wedding. Maid of honor grabs mic at the cocktail hour, begins her speech, rambling, drunk, quickly devolves to stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against this wedding and that's basically what killed her. Plus Vinny will never give up prostitutes. She is tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. Father of the bride died suddenly 3 days before the wedding. Pre-COVID. Daddy-daughter dance was mom, bride, and picture of dad. Same with walking down the aisle to give her away. Lots of tears. Not many smiles. Even the bartender at the hotel knew the night before and was talking about it with me. My wife and I had to postpone our wedding due to COVID. On the day we would have gotten married, my wife's grandfather passed away. I'm kind of grateful we couldn't get married on that day. There's no way we could have had a good time with such a loss in the family. The groom caught the bride in the toilets with another guy at the reception. He forgave her, but after 2 months or so he caught her again with another guy, a third one. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding, the bride went swimming in the ocean. It took place in Tenerife. She swam out too far and was basically lost at sea for 9 hours or so. She eventually found her way back but was in bad shape. Everyone was panicked the whole day and thought she drowned. By the time she got back, she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read a bunch of messages supposedly from her aunt, but it was quickly clear from the sexy content it wasn't her aunt at all. She had been having an affair with the best man for apparently years. They got an annulment shortly after. 60,000 down the drain. One of the most opulent weddings I've ever been to. Not as dramatic as some of the comments on here, but very awkward. Was at a lovely wedding. Really romantic. All candlelit. And the reception was lovely. Bestman made a good speech, then at the end he said everybody raise your glasses too. He said the groom's name and then accidentally called the new bride the ex-wife's name of the groom. LOL, I went to a wedding way back in the day where the officiant said the maid of honor's name instead of the bride's during the ceremony. It was something like, do you Greg take Angela, I mean Rebecca, to be your lawfully wedded wife? Hurricane Ivan. Our wedding was scheduled for Friday and the hurricane hit us dead center on Thursday. We were sitting around with no power on Friday and remembered that a neighbor was a pastor, so my partner and I just knocked on his front door and asked if he would just marry us in the front yard. So the big church wedding was cancelled, but instead I got married in the front yard with chainsaws and stuff in the background. Been married 17 years now. This didn't ruin the whole wedding, but it surely didn't brighten my day. After the ceremony we were standing in front of the altar and people took turns to congratulate us. As it was my mother's turn, she took my hand and told me she's sorry she raised such a bad person like me. Thank God my husband doesn't speak her language well. Best friend's mom got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason didn't hire a DJ. Last minute her mom asked me to manage the CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each. I tried to warn her that I simply did not follow, but she told me she had confidence in me. Apparently all her life she wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song, but I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset. So she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror/amusement of the crowd. For years after, when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, he'd say, "Is this the guy who ducked up my wedding? How ya?" I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They had been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd, I knew something was wrong. Friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she is overwhelmed. Immediately call friend and ask what's going on and if this was okay. Turns out friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, him and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to all those his wife and him invited and telling them to leave without telling his parents. Parents had a meltdown as we left. I work in weddings, and I have seen parents selfishly cause problems before, but this is the worst. When I was maybe 4 or 5, I walked in on my uncle's wife to be and her maid of honor kissing the night before the ceremony. Little kid me must have casually dropped this into conversation with my dad. It all unraveled from there. I wish I remembered more, as frankly it is some top tier family drama and my uncle has always been an asshole. I remember them jumping apart and her crouching to my level to say, "Hi, name. What are you doing here? I'm, name. I'm going to be your auntie." $28,000 wedding paid for by the father of the bride. Groom gets alcohol poisoning and goes to the hospital 30 minutes before. Not a happy papa, but there was plenty of extra $600 cake. $600 cake doesn't sound too bad for a $28,000 wedding. I'm pretty sure cake for mine was like $400 and we only spent like $5,000 total. Was invited to a wedding of a friend's friend. Because she didn't have enough own people to get the reception as big as she wanted it to be. Also the bride and groom were super young. Got pregnant 3 months after hooking up and marrying for all the wrong reasons. Party starts. Whole atmosphere is forced and strained. Everybody knows the whole thing is fake in a way. So I decide to spend my time outside with the smokers. Having a wonderful time until we can hear screaming inside and the bride runs past us, very Hollywood style, all teary and dramatic. Turns out the ice cake wasn't stored properly, was slightly defrosting and a little lopsided. Bride didn't come back. Cake was really nice. Couple got divorced 9 months later. The poor bride started her menstrual cycle on her big day, and she was nauseated and in pain all day. She couldn't eat any of the buffet because her stomach hurt too much, and anything she tried to eat ended up being vomited back up. She couldn't even stand properly either because of her cramps. She stayed seated. In most of the wedding photos, she's grimacing instead of smiling because she was so ill. I used to do catering work, and this one time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods on a beautiful river. I found out while we were loading the truck that the boss wouldn't be going and that I was essentially in charge. My boss promised that everything was taken care of, set up, etc. So, you can imagine my surprise when I arrived to this remote location and literally, nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords to run the coffee and tea. There were none. We needed tables to set up the food. There were none. I somehow whipped up impromptu everything for the missing things. And just as the bride and groom are arriving, we blow the fuse for our only power source and the place is plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker. I move some stuff around. Blow the fuse again. This delicate dance went on for the entire evening. Through speeches, first dance, the works. I think the worst part of the entire experience was when we went to rinse our dishes before boxing them up and found out that when we blew the fuses the water pump for the place stopped working and needed to be primed again. At that point I said, forget about it. We'll take them back dirty, and the crew and I spent several more hours after the long ride home doing them. That was the day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break and still ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. Bride has given explicit wedding instructions before through various channels. One rule being that there is to be no posts on social media before bride gives the instructions that it is okay, and certainly no posts before her. Anyway, a few hours before someone posts something saying they are at the wedding, whatever. Absolutely nothing malicious, just generic statement. Anyway, bride sees this. Vows go ahead in front of the congregation. At the end of the vows, bride turns to the congregation and says, please can you all unfriend or delete on socials, name. As I gave out explicit instructions that there are to be no socials until I give the okay, and name has broken that rule today. Happiest day of your life. And then imagine that. Literally just finished vows and new husband. Everyone awkwardly laughed as if she was joking. Nope. She then storms off. Her new husband awkwardly following on behind. There was a weird atmosphere after that, and everyone made excuses. I'm talking proper fake emergency stuff here. I have to get back because I need to bye, and left much earlier than usual. No one wanted to be there and having to have awkward conversations with bride, so most of them had left before they even saw her. There was no party atmosphere anymore. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he would be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end, he was too unwell to attend despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the wedding reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. drunk mother of the bride stumbled, fell, and rolled into a lake. My grandma did this at family reunion once. She's very dramatic and attention seeking. She started to roll, then stopped about halfway down, looked up to make sure people were watching, then continued to roll into the water yelling like Banshee. You could very obviously tell she didn't trip and was purposely rolling. She drives me crazy, so I don't see her often, but there's always a story when I do. Not me, but a close friend, wedding photographer. Waiting at the altar, the best man announced that the groom was coming out as gay and the wedding was cancelled. Everyone laughed like it was a best man joke. But no, it was very serious. Bride was on the way in the car. She was not happy. All the guests had to wait while they sorted their lives out. In the end, they split the reception room in two and each family had their own dinners. Needless to say, they didn't want the photos. Groom got so drunk the night before he couldn't make it to the altar at the ceremony. They still had the ceremony with only the bride and her party, plus one of the groomsmen, who apparently didn't get wasted. Everyone there was shaking their heads the entire time. The groom did make one singular appearance for a few seconds at the reception. He looked like a zombie and was wearing street clothes. And this was no trashy wedding. The bride was a professional dancer for a major label pop star. So that gives you an idea of the type of people that were in attendance. 200 plus people at the ceremony alone. Probably double that at the reception. They divorced within 6 months. When I was 6 or 7, I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me. So much sugar everywhere. Basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom, passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, uncle had a stroke and had died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying, and everyone except close family left. Bright side is the marriage is still going strong 20 years later, despite what happened that day. Aussie bride married into Russian family. There was vodka bottles on every table. The bride tried to keep up with the vodka shots. I was impressed at her effort. Then she disappeared for a couple of hours and didn't move much for the rest of the night. I worked at a historic house that was used as a wedding and party venue. It was very early 1800s, 2 floors, and upstairs was the bride's ready room. It was one of those picturesque TV looking venues. I learned 2 things there. 1. There seem to be a lot of women who want to get ducked in their wedding dresses by someone other than the groom just before the wedding. And 2. 200-plus-year-old buildings have incredibly thin floors. I was best man at my sister-in-law's wedding. Stepped in for the brother of the groom. That's another story entirely. For a whole year of planning, all the bride, Sil, wanted was a dove release while they said handwritten vows to each other. Very small, non-denominational. Most of the family are atheist anyway. Wedding day arrives, early summer, and something is off with the bird handlers. They show up a bit late and are sourcing help from the wedding party to get everything in line. When the time comes to say their vows, I help the handler carry the chest with the doves in it over to what is to be the altar where the bride and groom are standing. Vows are just about wrapping up and the handler gives Emmy the signal to open the chest. I open it and see 20-30 dead doves in the crate. I immediately close it to try and limit who knows what happened. Too late. The look of horror on her face was all that was needed. We spent the next few hours trying to cheer everyone up, but by the end of the reception the entire wedding party had organized and filed animal cruelty complaints on the handler. It was all anyone could focus on. It happened to my uncle's neighbor when they were attending his wedding. His poor mother was wearing a pacemaker that couldn't take all the commotion of the wedding. People didn't notice she's dead until someone went over to her table. Everything went sour. Honeymoon cancelled. Month-long mourning. Just a sad evening. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.